Hello everyone. So I have been on a quest to make another manly tumbler, and this one is going to be for my father-in-law. I found these pink 40-ounce handled tumblers on clearance on Target's website. And so I just kind of showed you the steps. I sanded it down, cleaned it off with rubbing alcohol, actually 91% isopropyl alcohol. Um, and then spray painted it black. Once that was dry, I am going to give it a coat of this coating epoxy that I just held up. It says that it's specifically for tumblers. It is on the thicker side, which is what you need when you do these types of tumblers. If the resin epoxy is too thin, it will just run off and fisheye and all of that. Now, even though this resin is on the thicker side, I underestimated the amount that I needed to coat the tumbler. I estimated 30 milliliters because I forgot that this was a 40-ounce cup and that it had a handle. So I should have done 40 milliliters in hindsight. So I'm going to be using alcohol inks, and this is a red called Cherry. And you may notice this is a new camera angle. It is now definitely into the fall season, heading into winter, and my poor husband has been parking in the driveway all summer so that I could have an entire half of the garage. This is called a yellow orange. And I do not get the fancy brands, everybody. I just get probably the cheapest kind that you can on Amazon. But anyway, now that it's colder, I rearranged parts of the garage and I'm just in a different spot so that we can both park in there. And then this is the yellow. So my father-in-law needs to be drinking more water. And he was over the other day and we were just talking about this. And he, of course, sees my whole setup in the garage and was just curious about it. And I said, I can make you one of these. I said, I just got tumblers on clearance from Target. And even though they're pink, I can turn them into whatever color you want. And so he had no clue what he wanted. This is a wine red. I knew I wanted the red to be deeper than your typical red. But anyway, so I had this idea because I've done a couple of geode tumblers recently where there's glitter underneath. Here is a white, and it's called bottom white, probably because it sinks to the bottom. I've never really noticed a difference. But here's where the real magic happens. So all those colors were on there that you couldn't see, but now that I'm adding the white, they will start to appear. When I place the colors down, I just did it sporadically, adding a little bit more orange. But because I did not have enough epoxy on this, the colors just did not adhere the way that I wanted them to. They didn't swirl exactly the way that I wanted them to, even though I kept adding more color. So I will show you how I remedy this versus scraping it all off and starting over. I'm taking my gloved finger and trying to remedy the fish eyes with little to no success. But anyway, so I had this idea to create, instead of a geode tumbler for my father-in-law, it would be kind of like a fiery background with a wood grain coating, kind of in a geode style where you'll see. So what I thought I added was black alcohol ink, but actually at first I accidentally added navy blue, quickly realized that that was navy, and then just covered it up with black And frankly, you couldn't tell at the end of the day. So took it off of the turner, held it upside down for a while, trying to give you a nice little shot. There was some pretty lacing, but it was awfully lumpy. No fault of the epoxy, my own fault for underestimating the amount that I needed. Trying to add a little bit more red. But giving it a good torch to get rid of any air bubbles. Still trying to fix the fish eyes with no luck. So what I end up doing is I just let this spin overnight, let it cure, and then the next day I will add another layer of epoxy and essentially repeat the process. Okay, so here's a close-up after that first coat. So this is still wet. It looks pretty, but it's not what I was after. I really wanted fire. And to me, this just says, I don't know, something else. It did have the kind of the smoky effect that I was going for. But I've done a few of these handled tumblers, and they're sized almost exactly to the turner. I guess the turner is a standard height. I don't really know. But I did end up propping up my stand a little bit with some broken popsicle sticks. And you can see right here. And I'm highly conscious of this possibility that my handle might touch the table the entire time that I'm working on my project. I'm going to ultimately coat this, put a wood grain over top, and then use acetone to kind of eat away at the surface and get back down to this fire design. So here's the next day. I'm putting a new coat of epoxy, the same kind, the coating Tumbler epoxy, nice and thick. I don't take time to heat up the epoxy resin. The directions say to, but what I prefer to do is I just mix it, get it on, and then heat it with, if it's a really cold day, I'll heat it with a heat gun first, just to kind of slowly warm it up. But if it's a, quote, normal day, I will just go straight in with the torch a few times, always keeping it moving, of course. Adding a little bit more of the color. Actually, I added all of the same colors that I added the first time. So the cherry red, the wine red, the orange, the yellow. I don't think I added any more black this time, but that white definitely brings out those colors. So I haven't mentioned the handle yet. You just kind of treat it like the rest of the cup, and I don't know, you figure it out. But it's not too difficult. The biggest worry in my mind was that it was going to hit the table. So give it a good torch to take care of any air bubbles. The alcohol in the alcohol ink helps to pop some of the air bubbles as well. You can see I'm working on a wine tumbler on the other side. That one's going to be a wood green geode as well with Christmas colors. And so I'm holding it upside down to get the epoxy with the ink to drip. I wanted the up and down motions, not just the side to side motions. When you do this, you really have to make sure that your foam insert is nice and tight. I recently purchased inexpensive shelf liner from the Dollar Tree, and it has just worked wonders. I don't know why I avoided it for so long. I saw so many people using it, and I thought, oh no, I could just use paper towels, or oh no, I could just use a pool noodle that's cut up into pieces. But all of those things have their disadvantages, and the shelf liner is great. So adding just a little bit more color. I'm much, much happier with it at this point. Again, knowing I am going to cover all of this up and then chip away at it eventually, or chip back down to it eventually. But I was talking to my father-in-law and I said, what, do you want any decals on it? And he said he wants the name that his grandkids call him, which is either Pop or Pop Pop. Oh, real quick, I put a giant bottle of Dawn dish soap underneath the food net to help it keep the food net propped up. So this is the next day. That second layer with the second coat of epoxy and inks was all dry. And I took a coffee filter, sprayed it with some isopropyl alcohol, and gave it a good wipe. I just never know what kind of dust or whatever might settle on my items. So making sure it's nice and clean. I use the coffee filter because it is lint free. And I'm just showing you there was no ink on that coffee filter at all. So this is the spray paint that I use. It's the 2x Rust-Oleum Black Matte. The best price I have found is from Target or Amazon, I think. So because I am impatient, oh, my kitty was in the garage with me. Normally he is not allowed in there while I'm working. There he is. He's a rag doll. Very curious. Taking him back inside. I always work on multiple projects at the same time. So I tried a new hack, if you will, that I learned from YouTube. And I stripped my first cup, my first tumbler. And you basically do it just like you would with acrylic nails. You soak the tumbler in an acetone-soaked paper towel wrapped in foil, and then put in a gallon Ziploc bag, leave it for 24 hours, and then essentially scrape all of the epoxy off. Now I'm doing my second one. This one I had to soak twice. I found the scraping quite therapeutic. I just used like a plastic palette knife, I guess, but it was plastic, not metal. So I wasn't really scraping the metal, the stainless steel at all. And then I just wiped it down with some acetone. And then before I redecorate it, I will sand it and then clean it with isopropyl alcohol. Okay, so back to my train of thought. I am impatient, and I put the hairdryer on that black spray paint so that I could then spray it with white. Okay, you need glossy. If you're going to do a wood grain, I highly recommend glossy. I learned the hard way. I used matte white on a tester, and it did not turn out the same. I really liked the way that the glossy worked. So you also saw me use compressed air in a spray can, and that just helps me get any dust or particles off in between my steps. So the glossy white is dry, and this is a 2-inch chip brush. I'm going to use 2 different colors or shades of brown. It honestly doesn't matter. You could use just one shade. If you use one shade, you're just going to want to overlap the same color once the first layer dries, and then you will get multiple shades. Make sure that your surface is covered while you're doing this and that all your other projects are moved far away, because this will spray everywhere as you paint up and down fast. So I'm starting with the chestnut brown, and what you want to do is have everything out and ready to kind of grab, because you put a strip of the alcohol ink down the cup, and then quickly set your bottle down, pick up your chip brush, scrub it if you can to prevent it from running too much. And then you just paint in an upward and downward motion until the alcohol ink feels dry, and it dries very quickly. But I'm telling you guys, I avoided this technique for such a long time because I was intimidated by it. And I did have to fail once. I tried it on a Christmas ornament. That was my tester. And that's where I used the matte white base coat and realized it was a fail. And then I tried glossy, and guess what? The first time I tried glossy, the glossy white base, it worked. And it was good enough that I was able to gift that cup to my stepfather. So I'm going in with a second color and just kind of filling in the gaps. If it ever accidentally drips in the wrong direction or whatever, you can go back and cover it back up. The alcohol ink will reactivate, and it is no big deal. Like, no stress, you guys. But you do just want to, the main thing is a vertical motion with the paintbrush. And try not to let the alcohol ink run, especially when you're doing the bottom. Try to just keep that ink right in the bottom. So that I'm going to put on a stand and put off to the side because I'm going to do the same thing to my white wine tumbler that's in the bottom corner. All right, so I let that dry for about an hour or so, and I'm going to be using pure acetone. It's the same thing that you could buy in a nail polish remover type bottle, but just make sure that it says 100% acetone. So I actually was using up my nail acetone first. I recommend labeling 2 containers, one with AC maybe for acetone, and then another for your alcohol, your 91% isopropyl alcohol, and that one I labeled AL. And I did it on the outside of the cup and the outside bottom of the cup, because when you're looking down at it from the top, if it's labeled on the side, then you can't really see the writing. And of course, both liquids are clear and both serve very different purposes. Be prepared to get a little messy. You'll want to prepare paper towels in advance. Some people prefer to use different types of cloth for this, but I don't mind paper towels at all. So the alcohol ink is completely dry, and I actually start this process by holding the tumbler in one hand and then doing the process with my other. However, in a little while you'll see that I end up moving the tumbler back to my turner because it gets really heavy after a while. It's a big cup to begin with, and then we've got all those layers of epoxy on it already. So anyway, I'm just taking my alcohol in that spray bottle, and I'm just pouring some of it out, not a whole lot at a time, maybe 15 milliliters or so at a time. And then the other cup has the acetone on it. That right there is a little imperfection from the alcohol ink, so I decided that that's where I was going to start. So I take paper towel, wrap it tightly around my finger. I think I'm wearing 2 sets of gloves at this point. If I'm not now, I definitely do later. And you want to just start rubbing, and you want to apply a decent amount of pressure because you're essentially wiping away not only the alcohol ink, but the 2 layers of spray paint. So I have the 1 layer of black and then the 1 layer of white. Very quickly, the paper towel is going to get dirty, muddy, and you will just want to kind of shift to a different area of that paper towel, still using the acetone. Anything that acetone touches, the paint will go away, including the alcohol ink. So you want to just try to keep this as controlled as you can. And then what I do is I take a Q-tip, regular old Q-tip, and I dip that in the alcohol, and I use that to kind of clean up the edges. The reason I'm using a Q-tip instead of a paper towel is to try and control where that alcohol goes, because similar to the acetone, the alcohol is going to disrupt the pattern, excuse me, the pattern of the alcohol ink. So you really want to keep both the acetone and the alcohol within the area that you're working. Anything that the acetone touches will be completely eaten away, any paint that it touches, and any alcohol ink that the alcohol touches will be disrupted. So just going in with a little bit more acetone. It's better to start with a small area and then make it bigger if you choose, than to start with a big area and then having to make it even bigger to kind of fix any of your mistakes. I will be cleaning up the edges if I felt like any of those sort of edges were too white. I will show you toward the end how to add some wood grain back in it and fix it. This is the third style cup that I've done like this, where it might not be wood grain, but I have like something underneath, and then I've spray painted over top, and then I'm wiping away different parts. So it just takes some practice, and you need to be gracious with yourself, because this might end up frustrating you the first time you try it, but with practice, you'll get better. This cup wasn't perfect at all. You see I have spots everywhere from some of the spray from the alcohol, but I will end up cleaning it up, and I'll show you how to do that. So yeah, I decided to just use my turner to help me out with holding the cup in place. I didn't even pin it. I just put it on there. And I did speed part of this up. But yeah, I just kind of went in different directions. I did some of the areas from the top. This area I decided to make wider and longer. But eventually I will do some areas from the bottom. I make sure that I go onto the actual bottom of the cup. I do a little section on the handle, and I do a few sections that are just kind of in the middle. So it's whatever you feel like doing, however much of the pattern you want to reveal, or however much of the outer pattern you want to keep. And as you can tell, when you start to use that acetone, the area just becomes very, very muddy. So you will want to continually kind of refresh the area of paper towel that you're using. And then as soon as you're relatively happy with it, then you want to come in with that alcohol. And if I haven't said it yet, the purpose of the alcohol is to kind of clean up the edges, but also to get rid of some of that muddy paint that might be left. And I do recommend cleaning with alcohol prior to moving on to the next section. But it's really whatever you want it to be. All right, so here's where I'm going to go back in and clean up some of the wood grain that I inevitably messed up from just mainly the alcohol spraying everywhere. So I take a smaller chip brush than I used before. This is just a 1-inch. It'll give me a little bit more control. And I put a few drops of the alcohol ink, same colors I used before, in a little cup. And then I just dip the brush gently into that cup and brush the areas that I want to cover back up. Mainly, I'm looking at those white areas around the chiseled out design, and I just want to blend the wood grain right back in with the rest of it. Remember that when you go back over alcohol ink with alcohol ink, the previous alcohol ink will reactivate. So it blends back together beautifully. I'm trying to focus on mostly that vertical motion just to blend it all back. Sometimes I do have to move my brush side to side. But yeah, it was really easy to fix. And then I will go back in with a little bit more alcohol on a Q-tip and just clean up one more time inside that design. A few of the spaces ended up revealing the cup underneath. And so what I did, what you'll see shortly, I tried a black Sharpie marker, and just kind of went over any of those areas with the Sharpie. No shame in that. But then I also ended up switching to a black paint pen. I have one that's gold, one that's silver, one that's white, one that's red, and then one that's black as well. So any little imperfections you can go in and fix with whatever medium would work best for you. And there's that bottom. So I'm going to show you, remember when you're doing the bottoms, you really just want to try not to let the alcohol ink run off the sides. And if it does, guess what? You just blend it back in. So this part is not sped up at all. This is all real time. Not sure if you noticed, but I am wearing a respirator. Because it's much colder out these days, I am working in my garage. And anytime you're working with acetone, especially, or epoxy, and you don't have good ventilation, you want to wear a respirator. They're a lot cheaper than I thought. So here's where I'm showing you the imperfection, or imperfections, plural. Just going over it with the Sharpie, and I'm making sure that my line with the Sharpie is not perfect. Like I'm purposely kind of roughing it up, trying to make it look like it's charred wood. And you'll see shortly I switched to the paint pen. And here's just where I'm cleaning up a little bit more with just alcohol on a Q-tip. And I also make sure that I don't put too much alcohol on that Q-tip. Like I'll dip it, but then I'll let it drain a little bit before using it. So just a few touch-ups. I let it dry, but not forever. I didn't give it a full 24 hours. I probably gave it, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes or so. And I'm going to, oh, here's that paint pen. And then once it dries, just for a little while, again, not too long, I will put a finishing coat of epoxy. I will let that fully cure. I will make sure it's covered by a food net, which you'll see shortly. And then I will clean up the top rim with my craft knife and just like a 220 grit sanding block, just to make sure everything is off of the very top of that rim. And here's the epoxy. This is the same type that I used before. This is the coating epoxy, the type that's made specifically for coating tumblers. I'm sure it has lots of other uses as well. And I put on a decent amount. Probably 40 mLs. It's a 40-ounce cup, so 40 mLs. After it's on, I gave it a good torch a couple times. And there's my food net. And you see that Dawn dish soap bottle? I use that to make sure the food net doesn't fall down and hit the handle. So use whatever you need to do to secure your items in place. And here it is, all cured. I'll probably end up putting a few decals on for my father-in-law as he requested. But the lid fit back on perfectly. There's that handle. The sun was making the wood grain look much more red than it really is. But I'll keep the stickers on the lid for him so he knows this is a brand new cup. Nobody else has used it. There's the bottom. Yeah, so I was really, really happy with this. So thank you for watching. Bye-bye.